Hey, church, I want to welcome you back to our third weekly devotional time. I hope it's been an encouragement to you so far and hope to continue that today. We've been talking through over the last few weeks what it means for us in the midst of this social distancing era that we're in to continue to live out the gospel. How we proclaim Christ both in our lives and to our neighbors and those that we have any kind of influence with, even though we're in this confined space right now. So we said very early on, as the governmental authorities begin to roll out these mandates that you couldn't gather with more than 10 people in a facility, we said that we would follow that direction that the government had for us in that we would submit to those authorities. Now, in our culture today, that concept is very difficult. There is a criticism to the authorities that are over us, whether it's the national level of leadership or the state level or even down to the city leadership that we have. It rubs us, for most of us, it rubs us the wrong way. We don't want anyone telling us what to do. I often make the choice of going and reading, and I know it's a poor choice, but going and reading the comments section of the city of San Angelo on Facebook whenever they post some update about things that are going on around the city, work that's going on, choices that the city council makes. I just find it fascinating to go and read people's responses, probably similar to watching or trying to drive by a car accident and not actually look at it. I look in on the comments, and true to form, they just spew this venom. Just the comments of the people that read whatever the city says, they talk about how dumb our city leaders are. They talk about how backwards our community is, and on and on and on they go to try to speak against anything that the city is doing. But what about us as believers? What does it mean for us as followers of Christ to respond to the authorities that are over us? How does the gospel speak into these things for us? 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17 gives us some of the insight of what we want to look at today. Peter says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil, and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor." So Peter's instruction here is pretty straightforward, isn't it? He says, be subject to every human institution. Submit to the human institutions that are out there. In fact, for their culture during their time, he speaks of the emperor and the governing bodies, which were not well thought of because they are conquering people who have come in and taken over Israel. And Peter is standing here among the believers saying, be subject to this leadership that is over you. Now, if I'm honest, I struggle with this concept. I struggle with what to do with bad leadership. I struggle with what to do with a leader that would make laws that go against what I believe is true in Scripture. And I think those things are valid. But for the scope of what we want to talk about today, we're not going to walk into that area. During the end of our time, I want to give you some things to consider, to think about from the Scriptures of what it means for us as we submit to authorities, how when those laws come in contradiction with God's laws, how we respond to that. But for our time today, I want to look at two things: whose we are and why we honor. Whose we are and why we honor. So from a standpoint of whose we are, we're going to back up a little bit in verses 9 and 10, where Peter lays out the picture of who he's talking to. He says, "But you are a chosen race." This is probably a very familiar text for you. "A royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Peter makes it clear. As followers of Christ, we are not a people who have earned or achieved our right of salvation. It is not anything that we have done on our own. He uses the word chosen. God chose those, or has chosen us. He has picked us. He has chosen us out of all of the sinful, wicked people in the world. He has chosen those to follow him. This strips away any kind of boasting on our part. It also makes it hard for us to lose our salvation because it is not based on what we do, but is based on what God has already done. Paul makes it clear in this idea in 1 Corinthians 6, 19 through 20. He says that we are not our own, that you were bought with a price, he says. That price was what we call the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, the God-man who was born of a virgin, who lived a life, a perfect, sinless life as a man on this earth, who was taken to the cross even though he had done no wrong, and crucified one of the most gruesome deaths, where he was dead and buried, and what we celebrated last week has risen again and was seen by his apostles and many others over 40 days of continuing to be on this earth. And so we serve a live, living God who knows what we walk through and has given his life so that we can have life eternal with our God. We are not our own. We were bought with a price. And so that idea for us as followers of Christ means that we bow to this one true God. Our life has purpose, and that purpose is wrapped up in bringing glory to our God, making disciples, proclaiming the hope to the world around us. We are called image bearers in the scripture. In the very beginning in Genesis, as God created all of creation, he gets to man and he says he created man in his own image. This idea of an image bearer is someone who proclaims the glory of whose they are, the sovereign authority that is over them. During that time, kings would often create statues, and they would leave these statues in their territories all over, so that anyone who was walking through those cities would look at this statue of this king and know whose that territory belonged to. For us today, we are the same thing. We proclaim, or should, our lives should proclaim the glory of who God is. Our lives speak to all of the gospel, the good news of Christ. We reflect that. And so, we honor the human authority as we honor the God whose image that we are in. 1 Peter tells us that it is the will of God that we honor the human authorities that are over us. Paul reminds us again in Romans 13:1 that there is no authority except from God. So God has ultimate sovereign authority over all and places authority over us. Peter tells us too that our willingness to honor our God by honoring authorities is essential to put the gospel on display. He says in verse 12 that they may see your good works and glorify God. When we build up where others tear down, the gospel is seen. When we understand whose we are and the freedom that brings, and choosing not to use that freedom for evil but for good, for proclaiming glory, the gospel is put on display. So let me encourage you today, no matter how you feel about our president right now, or any other president that we have in the future, whether it lines up with your political ideas or not, let the words that come from your mouth, let the way that you use social media be a way to honor your God and how you speak about these men or these people that have authority over us. When you are with your kids, pray for the authorities that are over us, whether it's our local, our state or our federal government. Pray for those authorities, that they would make wise decisions, that they would lead us well. Let your kids understand so that they see the gospel playing out in your life, that you are willing to submit to God by submitting to these other authorities that are over us. Don't succumb to the fruitless bashing on social media and other places and other circles that you're in. Use that time to build up. And I don't mean some kind of a false bravado, making up things that isn't true about those, but find things that are worth building up, about speaking the truthful things that you can speak about that are worthwhile. There are conversations to be had, no doubt, about the negative impact of some of the things that are going on around us right now and choices that our governmental authorities make over us. But you can talk about those things without tearing down, with being under submission of those authorities that are over us. Consider how the gospel speaks in to each one of those areas, how the gospel speaks life, that we want hope to come from all that we do in every part of our life. If you do want to explore some more about this, in times when we don't agree with laws that are placed over us, I would encourage you, take a look at Daniel's life. Daniel and his friends in the book of Daniel, they are taken from their land and put into a brand new kingdom that has conquered them and given instructions that are contrary to what they believe is true in Scripture. You can look at the early apostles. As they went to proclaim the gospel, they were told, do not speak that gospel. And they found it worthy of being beaten for the sake of that gospel. Those are all things that we have to consider in still honoring the authority that is over us, but choosing what is right to honor God in the midst of that. And so wrestle with some of that. I hope that encourages you. I hope that gives you a better direction to go this week. But let the gospel be spoken through our submission to the authorities that are over us. I love you guys and hope you guys have a great week.